Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. We will get to China and Iran, but before we do, I want to talk about our country and what's happening inside our country, and it's not a very pretty picture. First, I want to play for you Kamala Harris and something she said, Hakeem Jeffries has said, Cory Booker has said, and the Democrats are all saying now like a chorus line. Take a look at this. Go.
Look, this is a moment where there are no bad ideas. A no bad idea brainstorm is what I'd like to call it. And in that no bad ideas brainstorm, we talk about what we need to do and think about doing around the Electoral College. We talk about the idea of Supreme Court reform, which includes expanding the Supreme Court. We invite a conversation about multi-members districts. We talk about that if we win the Senate, which we should and we will, then the Senate Judiciary Committee should have rules that they put in place so when these people come before as nominees to the Supreme Court and lie, that they are held to account and consequence. Not just that somebody goes on cable news and says they lied, but that there are rules in place to actually penalize people for lying to a Senate Judiciary Committee. That we agree that it is right to have ethics rules for Supreme Court justices. And let's put those in place. Let's talk about statehood for Puerto Rico and DC. These are the things I think that we've got to do. We've got to neutralize these red states from cheating, including blue states expanding their maps. And all of this, I think, is look, we got to fight fire with fire. These folks are playing to win. We got to play to win, too.
She's the definition of authoritarian. She's the definition of dictator. She's also the definition of, I'm sorry to say, stupid. Now, they're attacking our Constitution, every element of it. That's what she just said there. They are promoting what I call authoritarian democracy. It's sort of a Potemkin village type approach to our Constitution. They don't like our Constitution. It gets into the way of their centralized big government agenda, and they have every intention of destroying it. You know, we had a constitutional convention, delegates sent by the states. They debated for months in a hot summer in Philadelphia. Their proposal was sent back to the states. The state legislatures had big debates. They had conventions. They had to decide whether to adopt it or not. And here we have a Democrat Party says if we win one election, we're going to destroy the Supreme Court. We're going to destroy the national voting system. We're going to destroy a whole lot, and you can't stop us. They don't even talk about amending the Constitution, do they? Well, I want to get into this. I want to get into this now. The Democrat Party seeks to permanently control our governmental institutions, just as it dominates our cultural entities, from the media to academia, from entertainment to science. It seeks to delegitimize and eviscerate the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, the Electoral College, the Supreme Court, separation of powers, and the rest of it, which obstructs its ideological designs. It abuses the rule of law by targeting its political opponents for harassment like President Trump, investigation and prosecution, and in the end, it seeks to imprison them. On October 30, 2008, when Barack Obama shouted to a crowd that we are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America, he wasn't kidding. When Michelle Obama pronounced that we are going to have to change our conversation, we're going to have to change our traditions, change our history. How do you change our history? We're going to have to move into a different place as a nation. And she meant it too. The Obamas are not alone among Democrats. You just heard Harris. And these Democrat apparatchiks, in their contempt for the country, in fact, it is a rare top Democrat Party politician who regularly praises America and is sincere about it. They mostly trash talk the country, smear millions of Americans. The examples are too numerous to go through. The propaganda is revolutionary, demagogues, malcontents, has a horrifying history of supporting the most contemptible causes, that is, the Democrat Party does, including slavery, segregation, the Ku Klux Klan, eugenics, even lynching, and yet they lecture us. We the people, there's something wrong with us. And they're so smart that they want to take the Constitution in one election and turn it inside out. Why? Power. One-party power. That's what they want. That's what they're talking about, not we the people. Indeed, almost from the start, the Democrat Party rejected principles and values of the American experiment. And today, it is the home of another anti-American movement, American Marxism, with its various ideological appendages. The Democrat Party ruling class, elites, activists, are united in this revolution. This revolution. Indeed, if you want to fundamentally transform something, you clearly don't love it. You don't even like it. Now, what if you do not want to fundamentally transform America and you love our country? Then it is important to speak the truth about those who seek to impose their will on the rest of us. And when dealing with such a dire threat to our freedom and our society and our way of life, we cannot dodge our responsibilities as citizens. These people are blithely going around telling us what they're going to do to our country, to our republic, and they're telling us they're going to destroy it and seize power. A democracy or republic consisting of multiple political parties competing for power is simply unacceptable to and incompatible with Marxism of any form or in any country, including the United States. Yet that's what the Democrat Party is all about. That is the unmistakable goal of the Democrat Party. As the late great philosopher Raymond Aron explained, the party structure in America and other Western countries is based on the legality of opposition. That is a rare phenomenon in history, a constitutionally based peaceful rivalry, the legal exercise of power, the temporary exercise of power, the legitimate method of exercising power. But you hear Kamala Harris and Jeffries and the rest of them. They're not interested in sharing power. They're not interested in any of that. They want iron-fisted control. That's what they're talking about. And they got to go through the Constitution to get it, and they're telling us that's exactly what they intend to do. Aron said that when a party, one party alone, has the monopoly of political activity, the state is indissolubly linked to it. In a multi-party regime in the West, the state boasts of not being circumscribed by the ideas of any competing parties. The state is neutral through the fact that it tolerates pluralities of parties. But not with the Democrat Party. You are looking straight at a totalitarian mindset. Oh, they laugh, oh, they talk, and they spin. It's a totalitarian mindset in every definition. Now, the Democrat Party seeks a one-party nation. As Aron describes it, in a one-party regime, the state is a party state, inseparable from the party, which monopolizes legitimate political activity. Now, if instead of the state of parties, a party state exists, the state will be obliged to restrict freedom of political discussion, since the state presupposes as absolutely valid the ideology of the monopolistic party. It cannot officially allow this ideology to be called into question. So, one-party power gets what? One-party police state. It could be slow at first, but it picks up speed eventually. You can see what's going on all throughout Europe. In fact, the restriction on freedom of political discussion varies in degree according to the regime of a single party. That's right, but the essence of a single-party regime in which the state is defined by the ideology of the monopolistic party is not to accept all the other ideas and to prevent some ideas relating to the party from being openly debated. So you cannot have an independent judiciary. You cannot have an independent Supreme Court. They rule in a way you don't like. You need to crush it, change it, alter it to get the result you want. Even reach into Virginia. Change that Supreme Court if you can change that court. All the state courts, all the federal courts, and the mothership, the U.S. Supreme Court. So the independence of the judiciary is to be destroyed. We've already known this with the Democrat Party. They put their ideologues in place, like Justice Jackson, among others. And this is where the Democrat Party has driven the nation. The power and the control of the Democrat Party and allegiance to it and to its ideology above all else are the objective. This is evidenced in the media, social sites, entertainment, and academia, all through Hollywood and all the rest of it. Moreover, says Iran, at least with regard to those who do not belong to the monopolistic party, the party state reserves for itself almost unbounded possibilities of actions. Is that not what you just heard from her? We're going to do this, we're going to do that. She's talking about destroying constitutional leverage. You know, people ask me all the time, why is this happening to our country? Don't these Democrat politicians and their friends care about our country? The answer is power. Power. The power to rule over the citizenry and remake not just society, but mankind into the kind of image that these would-be masterminds prefer and demand of us. In other words, they do not share our values, beliefs, and principles. They don't. They have a totalitarian mindset. This means the party must come before country, and the party is the means by which the country is to be conquered from within and ultimately ruled. It is essential to attaining, accumulating, retaining, and exercising power over the country. And it is the nature of autocratic parties around the world. Now, of course, Americanism and Marxism are utterly incompatible. Americanism emphasizes unalienable God-given individual rights, the right to life and liberty, natural law, that is, the existence of eternal truths, and moral principles, a civil society or social compact and contract where there's equal justice under a just law and order to secure the safety and well-being of the citizenry, religious freedom, limited government, representative government, private property rights, free speech, and the competition of ideas, freedom of association, freedom to bear arms, and so forth. Marxism rejects these fundamental principles and values and demands, in practice, the centralization of power over things small and large, control over the individual, conformity, obedience, uniformity of ideas and thought, and an elaborate, intrusive, and far-reaching police state to enforce its rule. This also describes the nature and character of the Democrat Party and what they seek. The Democrat Party has become the political and operational organism through which American Marxism functions. Just as earlier in our history, it was the party of the Confederacy and slavery and segregation and the Klan and Jim Crow, and now Hamas, I might add. In more recent times, it has adopted and tailored Marxist ideology to an American governance and politics. And in so doing, the Democrat Party has adopted what some call a passive or quiet revolutionary approach. That is, as the late Italian communist Antonio Gramsci argued, a long march through, in our case, America's culture and institutions. Indeed, Gramsci asserted socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the New Order, he said, socialism will triumph, but by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media, by transforming the consciousness of society. And I quote him. And it goes on. The war on the Constitution is afoot. Right now, open and notorious. The U.S. Constitution is the most remarkable governing document ever written. It creates a functioning federal government, but protects both state and individual liberty at the same time. It uniquely divides the federal government into three co-equal branches with their own responsibilities and whose members are chosen in fundamentally different ways. It is further designed to protect the people from at least two forms of tyranny, mobocracy and monarchy or dictatorship. The Constitution is a document that takes into consideration the extraordinarily diverse nature of America, from its more densely populated areas to its rural communities, and from its commercial centers to farming areas, from its fisheries to its mining towns, from people of deep faith to people of no faith, from the highly educated to the barely literate, from the rich to the poor, and yes, from white to black and people in every other skin color. It is a self-correcting document, allowing for amendments to address imperfections and unforeseen events should a significant portion of the body politic and the public demand them. The Constitution is a truly incredible manifestation of thousands of years of human experience and progress, yet drafted in a period of less than 5 months. But if your purpose is to fundamentally transform America, then your purpose must also be to destroy our constitutional republic. Thus, the Constitution must go, either all at once or by parts. And that is exactly what the Democrat Party and its revolutionary partners have in mind. Let's just take one piece of this, the packing of the Supreme Court. FDR tried to do this in 1937, and he tried to change it under the notion that it was a reform package because this court was filled with old white men who kept turning down his New Deal programs. But he came up against opposition in the Republican Party, but most importantly in the Democrat Party, because he had a massive majority in the Senate and the House. And his vice president, who had been a former House Speaker, led the charge against his own president. John Nance Garner was his name. And the Democrat Party rose up. In the Senate in particular, he had 70 votes against his plan. The bill was famously buried by the Senate Judiciary Committee and delayed, which was controlled by Democrats. 7 of the 10 senators who signed a scathing report calling for the bill's rejection by the full Democrat Party. Democratic Senator Burton Wheeler of Montana spearheaded the opposition, with Chairman Henry Ashurst used his position to delay proceedings. All Democrats. The Senate ultimately rejected the proposal with a 70-22 vote with significant opposition within FDR's own party. It was a humiliation because they argued over and over again, you cannot attack the independence of the Supreme Court, even if it rejects the New Deal. It was killed by the Democrats against one of the most popular Democrat presidents in history. Now look at the Democrat Party. What a disgrace. What a joke. They're leading the charge, and one after another is calling for the destruction of the Supreme Court, the Electoral College, the United States Senate, the House of Representatives, and on and on and on. And we better stop them. Oh, and by the way, what I was reading was from my book, The Democrat Party Hates America. We'll be right back.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.